Deputy Farrell, when you're ready.
The people are really worried about their electricity bills, and on Monday the SSE electricity price hike is going to kick in. That's hundreds of thousands of households that are going to be hit with a big jump in their bill, and that comes obviously after the hikes that we've seen from 3 other companies since your budget was announced last week, a budget in which you made a terrible decision to cut energy credits and do absolutely nothing for ordinary workers. We now have a situation where this month more than 1 million households are facing big electricity price hikes, and so many are wondering now, Taoiseach, what in the name of God are they going to do, because they simply cannot pay them. People have known for a long time, Taoiseach, that they are being ripped off. They're gouged by the energy companies, and now they simply have the proof. The latest report from the IEA is absolutely and utterly damning. It tells us clearly that these big companies are pocketing greater profits as wholesale prices fall, rather than passing them on to hard-pressed families. And it will come as no surprise that Irish energy bills are now 3 times higher than the wholesale cost. In nearly every other EU state, the wholesale price drop is being passed on to customers. Households are getting a break in their bills, but it's just not happening here. Households in Ireland are being taken for a ride, used as cash cows by energy companies to fatten their record profits, and your government, Taoiseach, is sitting back and doing absolutely nothing about it. Twice this week, the Taoiseach was asked a very simple question: what will you do to stop this rip-off? And on both occasions, he just couldn't answer the question. So I'm here to ask you, Taoiseach, what are you going to do to stop this energy rip-off? Because any government worth its salt, presented with the hard evidence that we have that their people are being so blatantly ripped off, will be right out in front, ready to take on the energy companies. But Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are just happy to sit back and let households get hammered. It's not just energy either, Taoiseach. It is food, it is rent, it is insurance, it is childcare. Costs are already through the roof, and households are now facing the hardest price squeeze in 18 months. Now, Taoiseach, you will have heard from people, and I've heard from people, and I spoke to 2 young parents in Galway this week, and they are out of their minds with worry. They were just about paying the bills last year, just about getting by, but recently they've had to come to rely on family members just to cover day-to-day costs. Both of these parents are working, and this is where the constant rip-off has left them, with that sinking feeling that there is no end in sight. The pressure is so immense, and your promise to have their back, to help, is broken. It's in tatters. And here's what you said on live television during the general election. You told me the cost of living is worrying you. That's why we will lower taxes and help with your bills. And then you turn around and you do what you did last week in the budget, with a tax cut package of over €2.5 billion, but not a single break for income tax for ordinary workers, not a single red cent. So what happened, Taoiseach? Why did you break your promise? The cost of living crisis didn't end, runaway prices didn't stop, the pressure on households has only gotten worse. You broke the promise because the election was over. We know it, they know it. You got what you wanted, and following through just didn't matter to you. We know that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil governments are always on the side of developers and the big landlords, but this government is increasingly looking like a government for the price gougers, on the side of the big energy companies as they squeeze every penny out of their customers. Well, people aren't going to stand for it, Taoiseach. People won't put up with being so blatantly ripped off. They want you to do your job. So we've asked the Taoiseach twice now, and I'm asking you, what will you do to stop this rip-off?
Thanks very much, Laskin Corla. Can I just start by acknowledging the deeply upsetting incidents that happened and took place at the Tusla facility in Donamead yesterday. And I know this is a shocking event. My thoughts, and I know the thoughts of people right across this House, right across this country, are with all of those impacted by it, in particular the bereaved family and those injured. The loss of life is unconscionable. The focus must now be on the welfare and safety of the young people and staff at the facility. I know Tusla is working to put additional supports in place to do that, but I also just want to acknowledge the staff and indeed An Garda Síochána and the members of An Garda Síochána who would have yesterday arrived at that scene. There's obviously an ongoing Garda investigation, but it is a horrific, deeply saddening incident that I just wanted to acknowledge here today. Thank you, Deputy O'Farrell, for the question. I hope you tell those people when you meet them across the country that there's only one party in Dáil Éireann that proposed giving subsidies to the energy companies. It's not Fine Gael, not Fianna Fáil, not the Labour Party or the Soc Dems or the Independents or anybody else in here. Your response in the last Dáil, your solution to the energy price situation was to give taxpayers' money over to the energy companies. And the only other place that happened, I'm answering the question, Deputy, thank you. The only other place that happened in the world was Liz Truss when she was British Prime Minister. So that was your solution, Deputy. Take hard-earned taxpayers' money from like that young couple you met in Galway and give it to the energy companies, throw it away. That was never a good idea. Never a good idea. And I welcome the fact that you now acknowledge it wasn't and are no longer pursuing that ridiculous, economically illiterate policy.
Order, please.
So that was the choice on offer to the people in the last election. Your plan to give money from the taxpayers to the big energy companies, and our plan to actually look at permanent, sustainable ways of reducing costs. Again, I hope you tell those people that we have taken measures in the budget to help them with the cost of energy. I'm sure you tell them that we did take a measure around reducing tax in the budget on energy, because we actually decided to reduce the VAT rate from 13.5% to 9%, not just for 1 year, not just for 2 years, not just to the end of the year, for 5 years. And I hope you welcome that, and I'm sure you do. We decided to reduce the VAT rate and make it permanent for 5 years. That is an important, practical, tax-reducing measure that we took in the budget. The second thing we did,
Order, please.
The second thing we did was increase the fuel allowance to help people most at risk, including, by the way, working people. And I really don't like the way you suggest that helping people through social welfare isn't helping working people. There's many working families who benefit from the fuel allowance situation too. And we've increased the fuel allowance by €5. We've also extended it to more than 50,000 households, including people on the working family payment. The clue's in the name, working, the working family payment. 460,000 households will now benefit from the fuel allowance. That's more than a quarter of the households in the country. That's a practical measure that we took in the budget. On top of that, we took a very specific, to answer your question directly, we've taken a very specific measure against the energy companies and the price gouging by having a tax on the profits of energy companies, which has yielded €271 million over a 2-year period. We taxed the energy companies on their profits, but you left that out as well. We also, on top of that, reduced the PSO levy for those on renewable energy.
Please, Deputy Gould.
Deputy Gould, maybe one day they'll give you a go with the leader's questions, but today it's Mairead, so please let her do it. We've also, to try and help people with the cost of energy, we've applied a zero rate of VAT in terms of the installation of solar panels, something people looked for, and we've reduced the rate of VAT on low-emission heat pump heating systems. We've increased the number of additional needs payments. Energy costs are real, absolutely, and that's why we took a number of practical measures to help people in the budget, and we targeted those measures at those most in need.
Farrell.
To be honest, Taoiseach, and I get this all the time, sometimes I think that you forget that you are the Taoiseach, that you are in government, that you've been in government since 2011, and that we now have a situation whereby people are struggling more and more and more. Why? Because as a direct result of the policies that you implement, as a direct result of the budgets that you continue to implement. That is why, Taoiseach, you said this, that and the other that you would do in the general election. Because you knew that the policies that you actually implement are making people worse off. Well, your policies have resulted in 300,000 households in arrears with electricity bills, and that is happening right now under your watch. What is happening now? We're going into the winter. People are going to be struggling even more because you have cut any supports that have been out there. So instead of listing out things that you think that other people could do or should have done, this is on you, Taoiseach. This crisis is on you. You need to help those people who are not able to pay their electricity bills, who are now looking at getting an increase in electricity bills, people who are going to suffer as a result of the cold winter. And what are you doing? Absolutely nothing.
Thank you.
But you see, that's just not true. I just told you what we're doing. You asked a question, a very important question, on a very important. Please, you asked a very important question on a very important issue, and the whole assertion of your question, the whole premise behind it was we did nothing on energy. And you said, you stood up on the record of the Dáil will show it, and you said we didn't reduce tax. And I'm telling you, we reduced value-added tax on energy bills for the next 5 years in the budget. So, error, you can't use the L word in here, but first mistruth you told. Second thing, you said we didn't help working families. Well, we extended the fuel allowance to people who get a working family payment. Second mistruth you told. And third thing, you said the Taoiseach and myself hadn't said what we were going to do in relation to energy companies, and I told you we'd brought in a tax on their profits that's yielded €271 million over the last 2 years, and your plan was to hand over taxpayers' money to the energy companies. There was a clear choice in the last election. The people gave their verdict, and they voted for centrist politics instead of your policies that would have bankrupted the nation and spent €4 billion more in the budget.
Deputy Sherlock. Deputy Sherlock.
Ceann Comhairle, I want to start by expressing my deep shock and sadness at the passing of the young person and to the injury to others in that apartment in North Dublin yesterday. Obviously, there's a criminal investigation and we're limited in what we can say, but I think there's an additional layer of sadness that this was an unaccompanied minor, thousands of miles away from his family and his community, and as we understand it, only days after arriving in this country. In the fullness of time, of course, there's going to have to be an internal Tusla investigation, but I very much hope that all the necessary procedures, staffing and safeguards were in place when that shocking incident happened yesterday, particularly given that this care home is contracted to run on behalf of Tusla and not by Tusla itself. Obviously, there will be a huge amount of trauma for the staff and for those other minors involved, and we have to make sure all those supports are going to be there for them. But it's important to say here that every day across this country, care workers go into homes that look very ordinary on the outside, but where incredible work takes place within, whether that is caring for those with an intellectual or physical disability or to children in care. And I know from talking to some of those care workers last night that yesterday's events have sent a chill down their spine, because the reality is that some care workers have to work in extremely difficult and challenging conditions where, in spite of all the safeguards, they have to put themselves at risk every single day to work and care for others. Taoiseach, this time last year we couldn't open the newspapers without seeing you make promise after promise to families desperately in need of childcare. They were told you could quickly do something on the cost of childcare in the early part of government, and we now know that that is a broken promise. You said you would intervene with regards to supply, and to be fair, government did commit money last week, and that's great. But with so much in this government, announcing is one thing, delivering is a very different other. And I have very serious questions to ask about the competence and capability within the Department of Children and Pobal right now. Last year, parents across this country were told more places were coming. 25 million was being put in place under the building block scheme designed to help existing providers expand. The process started, applications closed in January, feedback was due in March, and funding was to be spent in total by this December. Instead, not a single penny has been spent. Pobal only sent the contracts 2 weeks ago. Now we learn from providers there's missing paperwork. The earliest date for construction is 2 or 3 months away, and all the while construction costs have gone up since they were submitted at the start of this year. Some providers are telling me now they're unsure they'll be able to proceed with with their planned expansion, because the original grant is not going to cover the cost of works. This is a deadly serious situation, Taoiseach. We know there are thousands of families out there on waiting lists for childcare. 33,000 last year under the age of 3 on a waiting list. 10,000 children waiting for an after-school place, and all the while we're seeing zero urgency from government. This is having a massive impact on families. So, my question to you, what actions are you taking to ensure that the go-slow ends in the Department of Children and in Pobal, and what assurances can you make to parents out there that those promised childcare places from last year, let alone this year, will be made available?
Thank you, Deputy Sherlock. And look, and I want to address your first point in relation to Donemead, and I just want to join with you, and I want to join with you in rightly acknowledging the very, very difficult, challenging, stressful and sometimes dangerous environment in which our care workers find themselves in. None of us can fully comprehend that most horrific and tragic and saddening situation that care workers would have endured yesterday. And I want to join with you in paying tribute to them, and also agreeing with you that there will obviously need to be full answers and transparency in relation to all the procedures and protocols that were in place. But as you rightly say, a Garda investigation is now underway, and we obviously need to allow that process to proceed. And I obviously don't want to, and nor have you, in any way interfere with the privacy of those involved or the ongoing Garda investigation, other than to say this is a very serious incident. It needs to be treated as such, and it's also an extraordinarily tragic and saddening incident as well. Thank you for raising the issue of childcare, and I will directly speak to Minister Foley about the issue you've highlighted in relation to Pobble and the drawdown of grants and where that's at, and I'll ask the Minister to come back to you directly. I do want to say this: we're absolutely committed to reducing the cost of childcare to €200 per month during the lifetime of the government. I'll also acknowledge that I think the Labour Party were the first party to propose that, and that there is now a political consensus across this House from, I think, pretty much all political parties, that that's what we're going to deliver during the lifetime of this government. And I did say that I'd like to see significant progress on it in the early part of the government. I think we can still make significant progress on it in the early part of the government. We've only had the first budget of 5 budgets as well. But we do need to see everything move in some form of sequential order that makes sense. There's 21 commitments in the programme for government in relation to childcare. The next practical step now will be for Minister Foley to publish the action plan on childcare. How do you move the 21 actions together in a way that gets you to the €200 per month per child? Absolutely. But also makes sure that some of the issues you're highlighting, some of the issues I see in my own constituency and hometown around places, capacity, the need for public provision are also addressed as well, because there's simply not enough childcare spaces, and that lack of capacity is having a real impact for families. So we did, in the budget, as you acknowledge, provide funding to expand capacity in a sector while continuing to freeze fees at levels they were 4 years ago. The cost of childcare does need to come down. The Minister will publish that roadmap, that action plan, very shortly, and we do need to, I think, show parents and providers the sequence in which we intend to use to move forward. We have outlined a record budget for childcare of almost €1.5 billion. The National Childcare Scheme, which has over 250,000 children currently enrolled, will be further funded for an additional 35,000 children next year. That's a 14% increase. And in the coming months, the Minister will also set out plans for a new maximum fee cap set from next September. In other words, reducing costs for families paying the highest fees first across the country. We've taken measures, Minister Dillon and Minister Burke and Minister Foley, to sign off on a 10% increase in the minimum rate of pay for educators. That took place, I think, this Monday. There's money in the budget to do further on pay in 2026. And we did also specifically target children most at need in terms of additional supports, including expanding the back-to-school clothing and footwear payment to preschool children for the first time ever.
There's a serious credibility issue here, and we see it with regards to social housing targets and the under-delivery there, and indeed what we're seeing here now with regards to childcare places. And this is an issue that was raised with the department during the summer. I raised it last week, and we have seen no response, frankly, from the department on these issues. It's deadly serious for parents. We know that mothers are unable to return to work because of the lack of childcare availability out there. Parents are having to reduce hours, and of course there are thousands out there who want to rejoin the labour force after many years, and they simply cannot, all because of the shortage of childcare places. And frankly, there is a lack of urgency on the part of this government. Last year, people heard that urgency pre-election. We're not seeing that urgency now, and that needs to change. The other critical part of this is with regards to childcare workers. In January, we're going to see just a 75-cent difference between what an early years educator and the national minimum wage in this country. The reality is there is a massive retention issue within early years sector, and we have to ensure that those wages dramatically improve to ensure that there is enough places out there for parents, for families, and to ensure a proper working life for those in the sector.
So firstly, I want to assure you there is an urgency on our part in relation to this, and I agree with you that it's not, I don't want to say not just a social issue, because social issues are important, but it is an economic issue, that there are people at home today or changing their working hours or working arrangements, not out of choice, but out of a lack of a way to access childcare in a way that works for them, their working patterns, their life, their family. So it's a social issue, it's an economic issue, it's a social and economic issue that disproportionately impacts women, and there needs to be a real urgency, and there is an urgency. And I also think there's a degree of political consensus around at least the destination, the North Star. And I hope once Minister Foley publishes the roadmap, the action plan, which I expect to be in the coming weeks, that we can have good collaborative scrutiny and work on these matters here and at the appropriate Oireachtas committees as well. I would say, in fairness fairness, the last government you referenced, I mean, I was in the last government, I led the last government for part of it, and I mean, we did take a number of measures to reduce fees and reduce them year after year. I see Deputy O'Gorman here, he was the Minister, I acknowledge that role too. We are committed to getting to the €200. The pay issue is important. That's why we have obviously seen the order signed by Ministers Burke, Minister Dillon and Minister Foley, and we have also provided funding for further moves on pay in 2026.
Deputy O'Gorman.
Thanks, Last Ceann Comhairle. Tánaiste, I've a tale of two speeches for you that you might help me untangle. Last Wednesday in his budget speech, the Taoiseach included a section on climate change, and he said, climate change is not a distant threat. More and more Ireland is experiencing at first hand its growing impacts. And he went on to say, we have accepted challenging emission reduction targets, and we have considerable work to do to achieve what we've committed to. We know there will be cost implications if we fall short. We must factor these into our policy considerations. So later on the very same day, at the opening of Stripe's new offices, the Taoiseach said, I don't think we can mitigate for climate change. And just to put this into context, mitigation is the absolute central pillar of the global response to carbon emissions. And the Taoiseach went on to say, if we get into a position where we're going to challenge every single thing, saying it's against the climate, we're going to divide society fairly fast, and we'll then get a negative reaction against good progressive policies that seek to address climate and very serious issues. It's hard to reconcile these two speeches, both made on the same day. And the mismatch between them goes to the heart of your government's approach to climate. That the Taoiseach can speak to both the physical damage to homes and communities that extreme weather events can cause and the risks of fines to our country if we don't act on the one hand, and then set that up against the idea that negative reactions means we shouldn't progress on the other is inconsistent. Undoubtedly, winning public support, making it as easy as possible for people to reduce their emissions is vital. That's why when we were in government, the Green Party cut public transport fares, we made solar panels cheaper to install, we increased funding to SEAI to make energy retrofits a reality for thousands. But building support for the necessary measures our people, our country are going to have to take, that also requires leadership. It's the same level of transformative, of risk-taking leadership that was shown by Lemass or TJ Whittaker in the 60s and 70s when they transformed Irish society. But the vision that the Taoiseach articulated last week was, careful now, don't show too much ambition, yes to climate action, but just not yet, just not too much. And we're already seeing the wasted opportunities that slow-walking approach generates. The removal of the ban on dirty fracked gas, the raiding of the Climate and Nature Fund, and your own Climate Minister trashing the work of the Climate Advisory Council. So Tánaiste, is your government willing to lead on climate, or is it simply a government of just not yet?
Thanks very much, Deputy. Firstly, I've never heard Minister O'Brien trashing really anybody. It's generally not the way he operates. But look, I think the issue is very important. But you've asked me to try and untangle. I mean, in my mind, it's quite clear. The Taoiseach, the government, I think the people across this House and I think people across the country are very committed to the issue of climate action. What I certainly took from the Taoiseach's comments, indeed I was sitting here beside him when he delivered his budget speech, and I read some of the coverage of his comments and with his meeting in Stripe and the likes. I read some of that at the time. I mean, what I very much took from what he was saying was talking about the fact that when we're trying to accelerate the delivery of infrastructure, including often key infrastructure to help us meet our climate targets, we are living within a society where we're constantly being hit with judicial reviews and planning delays, and that there's somewhat of an irony, and while people have a right to do that, and I respect that there's somewhat of an irony when you're actually trying to deliver projects that would assist with the climate, that then actually people are taking judicial reviews or indeed planning objections on climate or environmental grounds. And I think the frustration that Taoiseach was voicing was, I'm sure some of you must have experienced when you were in government as well, this issue of the public good versus the culture of blocking essential infrastructure. We see it in relation to water. We often see it in relation to renewable energy. We can see it in relation to major transport, including public transport projects as well. So that's the point that I thought the Taoiseach was making in his budget speech. And of course, he was also making the point, as we all make, that there's no rowing back or ability to or wish to row back from the government's climate commitments. We provided €1.1 billion in funding for the Department of Climate in the budget. We're absolutely committed to deliver delivering on Ireland's responsibility to address the climate crisis. I know he also sees huge opportunities in terms of jobs and our economy from that transition as well. And the latest data from the Environmental Protection Agency regarding emissions does show that Ireland's emissions did continue to fall for a third year in a row, and they are at their lowest level in 3 decades. Emissions decreased by 2% in 2024 compared to 2023, and they've decreased by 10.6% from 2021 to 2024, and that happened against a backdrop of our economy thankfully growing strongly during that period. At the same time, I know and acknowledge, as does the government, it's not at the pace required, and a 10% reduction in emissions in 2025 will be needed if we're to stay within the first carbon budget. So there are real challenges, and there is a real need to, I suppose, pick up pace in relation to climate action. I accept that point. So too does the government. The next phase is now about acceleration. It's about doing more, doing it faster. But there is a frustration across government, and I think a frustration across society that sometimes it takes so long to actually deliver projects, and how we unblock those things and how we try to create that societal sense of people pulling together on the delivery of infrastructure rather than just heading to the courts or just objecting. And I think that Taoiseach is right to try and create a public discussion and debate in relation to that.
O'Gorman.
We have to judge a government by its deeds, not by its words. And when I see this government roll back on many of the key initiatives that were advanced over the last 4 years, I worry that this government is quiet quitting on climate action. But Taoiseach, can I ask in your own department, there isn't yet any clarity from the budget announced last week as to how much will be specifically allocated towards climate finance. As you know, this is money allocated to the poorest countries who are most exposed to climate disaster in taking actions to save lives and livelihoods. And the Taoiseach, as your predecessor, he announced in 2021 how important it was that Ireland was doing its best globally, and that we would reach a target of €225 million annually for climate finance investment. And we were almost there. I think it was about €190 million. So Taoiseach, can you give us any good news on this point? Can you confirm today how much is the government allocating towards climate finance in 2026, and will it meet the target of €225 million that the Taoiseach set?
So I need to get you the direct figure, which I can do once I leave the chamber. But yes, we will hit the target. It's a very important target that we set. I acknowledge the important role your party played in government, yourself and Minister Ryan, as he was then at that time. We are very committed to it, and we are on track to hit that target. But let me just get you the number, the specific allocation as well. I really do think we're at a very crucial moment in relation to climate action, and there is a real need to accelerate and pick up pace. But I do think that point as to how we bring people with us, and I don't think you disagree on this, you're the leader of the Green Party, you're passionate about this, you try to bring people with you on it, but how we bring people with us on the next phase is going to be really important. If we're to make the transitions that we need to make, it is going to require significant delivery of infrastructure, particularly around renewables. And I think the point that Taoiseach makes in public, he made it very publicly when he met Stripe, is not an unfair one. If we constantly get bogged down in judicial reviews and planning objections when we try to pick up the pace of delivery, that will actually frustrate our collective aim.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Taoiseach, I want to raise an issue that goes to the heart of the fairness and equality of the public service employment, the treatment of single teachers under the revised spouse and children's pension scheme introduced by the Department of Education under Circular PEN 14/05. Since September 2005, every teacher appointed in the public service has been automatically enrolled in this scheme. Membership is compulsory. It deducts 1.5% of gross salary in take-home pay every month to fund the benefit, payable only to surviving spouses, civil partners and dependent children. Yet under Section 6 of this same circular, the right of the single member to a refund, or the single person to a refund, which existed in the previous scheme, was abolished. Today, a teacher from Carricknavar or somewhere else in my constituency with no dependents, paid throughout their entire career for benefits, will not receive. There is no refund, no opt-out, no credit or no credit at retirement or death. So let's be clear about that, Taoiseach. That means in real terms a teacher on €55,000 a year per annum pays €825 a year, almost €29,000 over a 35-year career, deducted from their salaries with no possible return. Now, to my mind, that's not contribution, Taoiseach, that's an inadequate levy imposed on those through either choice or circumstances, or unmarried without children. It penalises the single person, and predominantly women, that sits uneasy with the values of a modern republic and claims to guarantee equality before the law. Article 40.1 of the Constitution enshrines equality. The Employment Equality Act prohibits discrimination on marital status, yet here we have the state acting as an employer, forcing a deduction that treats single people differently to married people. Totally unequal. Taoiseach, I'm asking you and your government, will you intervene and lead a cross-party departmental review with the Minister of Education and the Public Expenditure Minister to examine the operations and fairness of revised spouse and children's pension scheme, access the mechanisms to refund and opt-out credit for those that are contributing without dependents, and engage formally with unions and equality bodies to deliver a fair and modern reformed system. This is not about money, Taoiseach, it's about fairness, it's about respect, it's about equality for every public servant, married, single, gay, straight, male, female. It's about righting the wrong of an injustice that has persisted now for almost 2 decades.
Minister.
Well, thanks very much to Deputy O'Flynn, and I suppose you do raise a very interesting point, and I've heard you raise somewhat similar points around, I think, inheritance tax and the likes in the past as well, and it is around that fairness and equality agenda in terms of how our tax systems and schemes and the likes treat people, and I think it's genuinely a debate that is worth having and is certainly thought-provoking. Now, it is quite a technical and complex area, and obviously you don't obviously get notice of the issues coming up at each question, so allow me to do my best on it. But other than to say the idea, should we have a conversation and discussion about it and scrutiny of it? Absolutely we should. I would, I suppose, balance those comments by saying, yes, equality is absolutely vital. I'm very proud of the journey this country has been on in relation to equality and many of the very positive changes we've taken and the people of Ireland have taken over recent years. We also obviously need to look at another important word, which is around sustainability and sustainability of schemes in relation to pensions, particularly when the demographics of our country and indeed of our world are changing in terms of an ageing population and more people relying on that. And I would make a broad point, not to take away from your specific query, but I would make the broad point that, you know, often in a republic, we do pay into things that we may not necessarily directly benefit from, but we do so because we believe there is societal good, perhaps for dependents left behind, perhaps for children left behind. So I suppose there is that debate between what do I get in return for what I'm paying into. Is there a case for an opt-out in certain schemes versus what should we all be expected to pay into to create that sort of republic that plans and prepares for the future and those left behind. But you've certainly provoked a thought in me, and I think it is an issue that merits further consideration. And what I think we could perhaps do is maybe have the relevant Oireachtas committee or the likes ask that there maybe be a presentation and a degree of scrutiny. That's a matter I know for the Oireachtas committee, but I'd certainly be very supportive of that, because people are. I think this changed quite a number of years ago, I think, and my understanding from kind of general recollection is it changed on the grounds of ensuring the scheme could be sustainable. You're saying, how does that compare with the equality obligations? And I think that merits discussion.
Leo Flynn.
Thank you, Taoiseach, for your reply, but I have to say the policy itself offends the basis of fairness in the state. And I'm delighted that you have recognised that I have brought up in this House the unfairness when it comes to inheritance tax, when it comes to the single couples, 36,000 single couples that don't enjoy the same benefits as the married couples, or the childless couples that are in this country, or the million people that are childless in this country. But I have to say, if this was a private employer that was doing this, if this was a private company doing this to its employees, they'd be held to play, because they'd be in breach of the Equality Act. And what I'm saying here is I'm asking you to lead a delegation across the departments to see where we are in breach of equality. And I think there is a constitutional test when it comes to equality, whether it's an inheritance tax or whether it's the opt-in or opt-out in this particular circular. Because, Taoiseach, I accept what you're saying of what we pay in and what we pay out and what we get for things. But in all fairness, charging somebody €55,000 over 35 years that no dependent, no family member can benefit from, that doesn't seem fair at all to me. Thank you.
Taoiseach.
Yeah, thank you very much. And look, like I say, these are debates worth having because the composition of families, households has changed very significantly in our country in relatively recent times. And sometimes schemes and legislation can take time to catch up with that changing reality. So these are always issues that as legislators and policymakers we should scrutinise. I think, though, when that opt-out was ended back quite a number of years ago, long before my time in government, but I think the grounds were also expanded to include more categories through which more people could benefit, but I'm open to correction on that. And then there is that broader point that I make, that like two citizens could pay into a whole variety of schemes, including PRSI and the likes, and then at the end of a lifetime, if you tot up, one person may have actually derived more of a benefit from it than others. So I suppose we're not a private company in that sense. We do pay into the central pot for the benefit of having that safety net and the provision of services and the likes. But let me reflect on what you've said today and revert to you directly. Thank you.
Deputy Heenan.
Taoiseach, I want to also express